About this guy. I picked him because, well, I didn't know much about him, but also I'm tickled over his uh, after school things with his girlfriend. His name is Tommy Reina, 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 I guess. He'd been a long time, very important captain in the Morello family, which was powerful. But it started to fall apart, the seams a little bit, loosen up in about 1910. A lot of those guys were involved with counterfeiting, and so the federal government got involved. It was a lot of trouble. So to save himself and to stay in business, Reina broke off. Him and a guy named Salvatore D'Aquila started his own group. Joe Masseria started his group. So they were gangs, by the way, not families. But within a few years, Reina has an underboss, Tommy Gagliano, and they're controlling operations in parts of East Harlem and across the Bronx. They had a monopoly on icebox distribution and ice that went with the box. Gagliano and Reina were related to Reina's wife. But anyway, how that worked is they had a horse and wagon and they'd go to wherever the ice was kept and they cut a big block and they sold you a box or rented you an icebox refrigerator. And it's only about, I don't know, 4 feet high and they were wood. And then the top foot of the box was your freezer. And they'd open a thick door and there was like a padding in there, and you'd throw in your block of ice and you'd put the meats on there and stuff. And every week the guy would come and replace it. And then you had another guy who went around and he signed up customers and he got a percentage for that. As for being a monopoly, I've been reading this guy about this guy, and they say he had a monopoly, but so what? The town I came from, the people, the Farrell family who owned the factory, went out and bought the only lake in town, and they declared it to be our reservoir because they could. And then they figured, well, you know what? We'll sell ice too. So no one could compete against it. They had a monopoly. You could financially, it wasn't possible. And if you did start an ice delivery business, I mean, they'd cut you off the legs. They controlled the town. They hired everyone in the town, worked for them one shape or form or another. So it wasn't what he's doing wasn't bad. He hustled. He came to America around the turn of the century, 1903, 1904, and he really did try to create something out of himself. He was a bad guy most of the time, but still. Anyway, when Joe Masseria took over this ailing Morello operation, he began to pressure Reina. He wanted a bigger cut of his profits because Reina was really doing good. And at this point, Reina may possibly, who knows, considered defecting over to Salvatore Maranzano's group, which opposed Masseria. Maranzano had arrived in New York around 1925. He took over the Castellammare families that were operating in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and they weren't at heads yet, Masseria and Maranzano, but that's where it was going. It was inevitable. So Masseria suspected treachery on behalf of Reina, and he arranged for Reina's lieutenant Tommy Gagliano to have Reina killed. At this point, we need to stop and tell those people who are going to write in immediately, say, no, that didn't happen. You don't know. You know what I mean? You're not a 125-year-old guy. You weren't there. So my research is as good as everybody else's. I get these letters saying, that's absolutely not true. How do you know? You know what I mean? Unless you were, if you are a 125-year-old guy and you were there, oh my God, call me. Anyway, on the evening of February 26, 1930, Reina left his mistress's house, and she was Maria Enos. She had an apartment on 1521 Sheridan Avenue in the Bronx. Uh, he left, she walked into the door, and he was ambushed by two men. They jumped up out of the dark with a shotgun. They shot him directly in the back of the head with a double barrel shotgun, killed him, immediately. They left the murder weapon, they threw it really under a parked car, and they escaped, never to be heard from again. His death, Rita's death, really was the opening round of what would become the Castellammare's war between Masseria and Maranzano. There's a long list of possible assassins. I've heard Vito Genovese, Joe Pinzola, who was related, Lucky Luciano. I don't think it would have been Luciano. Joe Masseria wanted Joe Pinzola, the guy I just mentioned, to take over the Reina clan. And that did not sit right with the Reina leadership. Gagliano, Lucky Luciano wasn't tickled about it either. At this point, Luciano's more or less acting as the underboss or assistant to Gagliano, right? So they all opposed Pinzola. They began to cooperate quietly with Masseria's enemies in the Castellammare War. The police. So anyway, moving back to the assassination, police rushed to the scene where Reina had just been shot. They found a handgun he had on him. He had another one in his car with ammunition, $840 in cash. So before we go further, let's discuss Mrs. Tommy Reina. Angelina Olivieri was Tommy Reina's wife. She was also born in Corleone. Her mother was of the Streva clan, Streva, Streva clan. Her second cousin was Paulino Stravina. He was a captain with Giuseppe Morelli. He had been important overseas in Italy, and he had once worked. Morello had once worked for this Streva clan as a cattle thief of all things in around 1890. So, I didn't think they had cattle thieves in Italy. Who knew? So, Gagliano and Angelina, they had Reina and Angelina, they had 11 children. 9 survived into adulthood, 6 boys, 3 girls. Their daughter, Carmela, who was called Millie Reina, married Joe Fallaci, the poor woman. When Fallaci turned, she was ostracized. It's really not right. She had to raise, I think, 2 daughters alone, and she'd never done it. She'd been a housewife. She didn't have any money, so it was a tough life for her. And you know, the mob world was people didn't dislike her. It wasn't good to be seen hanging out with her. So it's a rough life. Anyway, there were more relations. In July 1913, Reina's sister Bernarda married mafia boss Vincenzo Tiranova. So Reina lived in a 16-room home at 3183 Rochambeau Avenue in the Bronx, and it was valued then at 40 grand. So today, about just over $500,000, $600,000. But bear in mind, you could buy a brand new house on an acre of land for $7,000 at that time. So our boy was doing pretty good. However, Reina only lived there part time. He lived on and off with his mistress, Maria Enos, Enis, who was called in the papers gorgeously attired blonde. Her apartment was, as I said, at Sheridan Avenue, was called the Love Nest in the papers. I couldn't. I tried so hard to find out more about her. I came to different conclusions. Her name may have been Maria Corpora, and she hailed from Palermo. She was married, I think, originally to a guy named Jim Enis, Ennis, an Irish immigrant. But I couldn't find anything, and I'd like to, you kind of wonder what happens to these people. Maria had walked Reina her boyfriend to the sidewalk, and she was about to shut the door, and she watched these 2 guys murder her boyfriend. She fell to her, she ran out, fell to her head, took Reina's head in her lap, and she sobbed, "He's dying, he's dying." At the hospital, she sobered up right away. She claimed that the 840 and the diamond-studded watch the detectives took from Reina were hers, and she had to return them. Maria is told to go to the Bath Avenue police station. They have questions. And who's there but Angelina Reina, Reina's wife, and their daughter Rose. So the cops see this is a situation. They put them in different rooms, but Angelina can't control herself. She stands up. She's furious. She runs into the next room where they've got Ennis under questioning. She grabs her by the throat. She's going to kill her, I guess. She's screaming at her. It took several cops to pull them apart. Well, actually, to pull Angelina off of Maria. Marina, by the way, from what the description is, she was tiny. I don't know how big Angelina was, but she was mad. And Angelina is screaming, "You're not satisfied with one man. You had to take mine away from me and my children." So anyway, Tommy Reina is now dead and gone. So control of his organization even fell in the long run to Tommy Gagliano. Masseria's guy, Joe Pinzola, the one he wanted to put in as a puppet boss, didn't work out because somebody, persons unknown, murdered Pinzola on September 1930. To replace Pinzola, Masseria, he's starting to see the picture on the writing on the wall. He thought, well, he appoints Gagliano to head the family, which is a smart move because it kept him alive a little bit longer. After the Castellammare War ended, Gagliano appointed Luciano as his underboss. Gagliano also became one of the first members of the ruling commission, the ruling mafia commission. In 1932, only 2 years after he took over. Gagliano gets hit with a tax evasion thing, gets sent to 15 months Atlanta Penitentiary. That was it for him. After that, Gagliano he was all about keeping a low profile, sticking to business. He didn't want to hear about it, any publicity at all. Luciano was his frontman, took a lot of lightning in the name of Gagliano. During the Second World War, Gagliano was a busy guy. He made fortunes in gasoline, meat, and sugar rationing. All those things were rationed, of course, so you got very little of them. But he, in his great effort to help us fight the Nazis, was selling it in a black market. When orders came down to anyone, they came through underlings, Luciano, and then to the captains and so forth. He was so secretive, no one is really sure when he died. He probably died on February 16, 1951.
The gabagool.
I don't really know what that is.
You know, gabagool.
I don't have to have
What
that.
he's trying to say is
Guys,
gabagool.
guys, all right.
I don't really think that we have that.
That's okay.
Bring him the gabagool.
I will have the spaghetti with a side salad.
Okay.
If the salad is on top, I send it back.